Nehemiah chapter 9. وبيوم 24 لحدث هذا نهسفوا بني إسرائيل بالصوم وبشقيم وهذا ما عليهم. And in the 24th day for this month the sons of Israel gathered in fasting and in sackcloth, and earth upon them. ويبادلوا زرع Yisrael mikol bnei nekar. And the seed of Yisrael, they were separated from all sons of foreignness. ويعمدوا ويتودوا على خطاوتهم وعوونات أبوتهم. And they stood and they confessed upon their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. ويقوموا على عمدهم, and they stood upon their standing place. ويقرأوا بسفر توراة يهوه إلههم ربيعية اليوم. And they called out in the book of the law of Yahweh their God, a fourth of the day. وربيعيت متوديم ومشتهويم ليهوه إلههم. And a fourth, one's confessing and one's bowing down to worship to Yahweh their God. ويقوم على معالي حلويم يشوع وباني قدميل شبانياه بني شربياه باني Kanani. And Yeshua stood upon the steps of the Lewiyim, and Bani Qadmiel Shabaniyah Buni Sherebiah Bani Kanani. ויזעקו בקול גדול אל יהוה אלוהיהם. And they cried out by means of a big voice to Yahweh their God. ויאמרו הלוויים ישוע וקדמיאל בני חשבניah sherebiah הודיah שבניah פתחיah. قوموا بركوا את יהוה אלוהיכם מן העולם עד העולם. And the Lewiyim said, that is, Yeshua and Qadmiel, Bani, Hashabniyah, Sherebiah, Hodiyah, Shabaniyah, Petahiyah. Arise ye, bless ye Yahweh your God. From the unseen time as far as the unseen time. وَيَبَرَّكُوا شَمَ كَبُوتَكَ, and let them bless thy name of glory. Umromam ala kol baraka utahillah, and being lifted up over all blessing and praise. Atahu Yahweh levadaka, Thou art Yahweh thyself alone. Ata ashita et hashamayim sheme hashamayim ukol shabam. Thou hast effectuated the skies and the skies of the skies and all their host. Harish ukol atra alaha, the earth and all which is upon it. Hayamim Ukol atrabahem, the seas, and all which is in them. Wahata mahaya et kulam, and thou art one giving life to them all. Ushjavah hashamayim leka mishatahawim, and the host of the skies, to thee they bow down in worship. Atahu Yahweh Elohim, Atraba Harata Babaram, Uhosheto Mehur Kashadim. Thou art he, Yahweh the God, which thou hast chosen in Abraham, and thou hast brought him out from Ur of the Kasdim, Washamata Shemo Abraham, and thou didst set his name Abraham. Wamashahata et levavo Nehemiah lepaneka, and thou foundest his heart steadfast before thy faces. Ukarot immo habrit, and to cut with him the covenant. La tet et herish haknaani hahitti hahmori wahaperizi wahayavusi wahagirgashi la tet lizara'o, to give the land of the Canaani, the Hitti, the Amori, and the Perizi, and the Yabusi, and the Girgashi, to give to his seed. Wataqam et devaraka ki tzaddiq ata, and thou hast caused thy words to stand, for thou art righteous. Water et roni avotenu b'Mitzrayim ve'et za'akatam shama'ata al Yam Suf, and thou sawest the affliction of our fathers in Mitzrayim, and their cry thou heardest upon the sea of reed. Watitena hotot umopetim beparao ubekol avadai ubekol amharasho ki hadata ki hezidu alehem, and thou gavedst signs and wonders against Paro, and against all his servants, and against all the people of his land. For thou knewest that they dealt proudly over them. Wata'ashalakashem kahayom hadha, and thou effectuatedst for thee a name like this day. Wahayam baqa'ata lipnehem, and thou didst divide the sea before their faces. Waya'abru b'toka hayam bayabasha, and they passed through in the midst of the sea, in the dry land. Ve'etrod pehem hishelahta bimtholot kamo heaven b'mayim azim, and their pursuers thou didst cast into the depths like a stone in strong waters. Uba amud anan hinhitam yomam, and by means of a pillar of cloud thou leddest them by day. Uba amud heshalayla lahayir lahem et haderk atrayel huvah, and by means of a pillar of fire by night, to enlighten for them the way which they should go in it. وعلى هر Sinai يردتا, and upon Mount Sinai thou descendedst. وَدَبِّرْ عِمَّهِمْ مِشَّامَيِمْ, and wordingly with them from skies. وَتِتَّنَ لَهِمْ مِشْپَاتِيم يَشَارِيم وَتُورُوتِهِمْ حُقِّيم وَمِثْوَوتِ طُوبِيم. And thou didst give to them judgments, righteous upright judgments, and laws of truth, statutes and commands, good ones. وَتَشَبَّتْ قَدْشَكَ هُدَعْتَ لَهِمْ, and thou didst cause for them to know thy Shabbat of holiness. وَمِثْوَوتَ وَحُقِّيم وَتورah ציווית لهم بيد Moshe عبدك, and commands and statutes and a law thou didst command for them by means of the hand of Moshe thy servant. وَلِحْمْ مِشَّامَيْم نَعْتَتَ لَهِمْ لِرَغَبَامْ, and bread from skies thou gavest to them for their hunger. وَمَيْم مِسَلَعْ هُشِّتَ لَهِمْ لِثَمَامْ, and waters from a rock thou didst bring out for them for their thirst. وَتُمِرْ لَهِمْ لَابُوهْ لَارِثَتْ إِتْ هَارْكَ أَتْرَنَا شَهْتَ إِتْ يَادَكَ لَاتِتْ لَهِمْ, and thou saidst to them to come to possess the land which thou liftedst thy hand to give to them. وهم وهبوتenu hezidu, and they and our fathers were proud. وَيَقَشُوا et orapam, and they hardened their neck. وَلَوْ هَشَامَعُوا إِلْمِثَوَوتَكَ, and they listened not to thy commands. وَيَمَهْنُوا لِشَمُوعَ وَلَوْ ذَكَرُوا نِفْلَوتَكَ أَتْرَعَشِيتَ عِمَّهِمْ, and they refused to hear, and they remembered not thy wonders which thou hast effectuated with them. وَيَقَشُوا et orapam, وَيَتَنُوا rosh لَاثُوب لَعَبَدُوتَام بِمِرْيَام, and they hardened their neck, and they gave a head to return to their slavery in rebellion. But the Greek text says words that come from B'Mithraim, in Mithraim, Egypt. وَهَتَّى هَلُوهِ سَلِيحُوتْ حَنُّون وَرَحُومْ إِرْكَ أَبْهَيْم وَرَبِّ حَسَد وَلُوهِ عَزَبْتَام. But thou art a God of forgivenesses, gracious and merciful, long of nostrils, that is, slow to anger, and abundant of loving kindness, and thou forsookest them not. أَبْكِي عَاشُوا لَهِمْ عِجْلَ مَسَّخَا, even as they effectuated for them a calf of cast metal. وَيُهْمَرُوا ذَهَلُوهَكَ أَتْرَهَلَكَ مِمْ مِثْرَايِمْ, And they said, This is thy God, which hath brought thee up from Mizraim. Vayashu nehathot gedolot, and they effectuated great provocations or blasphemies. Wahata برحمك harabim lo azabatam bamidbar, and thou by thy manifold mercies forsookest them not in the wilderness. Et amud he'anan lo hasar me'alehem biyomam, the pillar of the cloud did not turn aside from over them in the day. Lahanahotam bahaderk, to lead them in the way. Ve'et amud ha'esh b'layla laha'ir lahem, ve'et haderk atar yelku bah, and the pillar of the fire in the night to enlighten for them, and the way which they should go in it. Wuruhaka hat oba natata lahashikilam, and thy good spirit thou gavest to cause them wisdom. Umanaka lohamanata mipihem, and thy man thou withheldest not from their mouth. Wamaim natata lahem lithamam, and waters thou gavest to them for their thirst. Waraba'im shana kilkalatam bamidbar lo haseru, and 40 years thou didst sustain them in the wilderness. They lacked not. Shalamotehem lo havalu, their garments wore not out. Waragalehem lo habatheku, and their feet swelled not. Watitenelahem mamalakot wa'amamim watahalakim lepeah, and thou gavest for them kingdoms and peoples, and thou didst apportion them for an extremity. Wayerathu et hersh Sihon, وet hersh melech Heshbon, وet hersh Og melech Habashan, and they did possess the land of Sihon, and the land of the king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, the king of the Bashan. Uvenehem Herebita Kekokabe Hashamayim, and their children, their sons, thou didst make abundant like the stars of the skies. Watbihem el harsh atraha marta lavotehem lavoh larathet, and thou broughtest them to the land which thou saidst to their fathers to come to possess. Vayavohu habanim vayerethu et harsh, and the sons came and they possessed the land. Watakna lipanehem et yothve harsh haknaanim watitnem beyadam, and thou subduedst before them the dwellers of the land, the Canaanim, and thou didst give them in their hands. وإت ملكهم وإت عممي هارش لعشوت باهم كيرشونام, and their kings and the peoples of the land to effectuate among them like their pleasure. ويلكدوا عاريم بالثورات وهذا ما شمنا, and they captured fortified cities and a fat ground. ويرثوا باطيم مليهم كل طوب بوروت حثوبيم كراميم وزيتيم وعيش مهكال لا روب, and they possessed houses full of all goodness, cisterns hewn out, vineyards, oliveyards, and tree of food for abundance. ويأكلوا ويشبعوا ويشمنوا, and they ate, and they were satisfied, and they became fat. ويتعدنوا بطوبك هجادول, and they delighted themselves in thy great goodness. وَيَمَرُوا وَيَمْرَضُوا بَاكَ, and they were contentious, and they rebelled against thee. وَيَشْلِكُوا إِتَ تُورَاثَكَ أَخْرَ قَوَّامٍ, and they threw thy law behind their back. وَإِتَ نَبِيَّكَ هَرَقُوا, and thy prophets they slew. أَطْرَهِ عِدُوبَامْ لَهَثِيبَامْ هِلَكَ, which bore witness among them to turn them to thee. وَيَعَشُوا نِهَاثُوتَ گَدَولُوتَ, and they effectuated great blasphemies, great provocations. وَتِتْنَمْ بِيَدْ ثَرِّهِمْ, and thou gavest them into the hand of their adversaries. وَيَثِرُّ لَهِمْ, and they distressed them. وَبِعِتْ ثَرَّاتَمْ يِثَّعَقُوا هِلَكَ, and in the time of their distress they cried out to thee. وَحَتَّى مِشَّامَيْمْ تِشْمَعَ, and thou from skies didst hear. وَكُرَحْمَكَ هَرَّبِّيمْ تِتَّنَ لَهِمْ مُوشِعِيمْ وَيُوشِعُمْ مِيَدْ ثَرِّهِمْ, and as thy tender mercies abundant, thou didst give for them saviours, and they saved them from the hand of their adversaries. وكنوح لهم ياثوب لعشوت رع لبانكا, and as the resting for them, they returned to effectuate evil before thy faces. وَتَعَذَّبِهِمْ بِيَدْ أُويَبِهِمْ وَيَرْدُوا بَهِمْ, and thou leftest them in the hand of their enemies, and they ruled among them. وَيَثُوبُوا وَيَزْعَقُوكَ, and they returned, and they cried out to thee. وَحَتَّى مِشَّامَيْمْ تِشْمَعَ وَتَثِيلِمْ كَرَحْمَكَ رَبُّوتَ إِتِّيمْ, and thou from skies didst hear, and thou deliveredst them, like thy tender mercies, abundant times. وَتَعَذْبَهِمْ لَهَثِيبَامْ إِلَتُورَاثَكَ, and thou testifiedst among them to return them to thy law. وهما هزيدو ولو هشامعو لمثواتك وبمثباتك حاته بام أطر يعشهادام وحياباهم. And they were arrogant, and they listened not to thy commands, and in thy judgments they sinned against them, which if a man should do, he shall live also by means of them. Wayitanu katep sorarat, and they gave the shoulder rebellious. وعربهم هقشوا وَلَوْ شَامِعُوا, and their neck they hardened, and they listened not. وَتِمْشُكَ عَلَيْهِمْ شَانِيمْ رَبُّوتْ, and thou didst drag upon them many years. وَتَعَذْ بَامْ بُرُوحَكَ بِيَدْ نَبِيهَكَ وَلَوْ هَذِينُ, and thou testifiedst among them by thy spirit, by the hand of thy prophets, and they gave not ear. وَتِتَنِمْ بِيَدْ عَمِّ هَرَاشُوتْ, and thou didst give them into the hand of the peoples of the lands. وبرحمك هربيم لوه عشيتام كالا ولوه عزبتام, yet by thy manifold mercies thou effectuatedst them not an end, and thou forsookest them not. Ki el hanun warahum ata, because a gracious and merciful God thou art. وَأَتَّى Eloheinu ha'el hagadol hagibor wahanorah shomer habrit wahahesed עליהם את לפניך את כל התלה אשר נתתנו למלכנו לשרנו ולכהננו ולנביאנו ולאבותינו ולכל עמך מימי מלכי אסור עד היום הזה. And now, our God, the great and mighty and terrifying God, the keeper of the covenant and the loving kindness, let it not be little before thee all the hardship which hath found us for our kings, for our princes, and for our priests, and for our prophets, and for our fathers, and for all thy people, from the days of the kings of Athur as far as this day. وَهَتَّى صَدِّيقَ عَلَى كُلِّ هَبَّةٍ عَلَيْنُ كِي هَمَتْ عَشِيتَا وَنَحْنُ هِرْشَعْنُ. But thou art righteous over all the thing coming upon us, because thou hast effectuated truth, and we have done wickedly. ואת מלכנו שרנו כהננו ואבותינו לא עשו תורתך, and our kings, our princes, our priests, and our fathers have not effectuated thy law. ולא הקשיבו את מצוותיך ולעדותיך אשר העדות בהם, and they have not hearkened to thy commands and to thy testimonies, which thou didst testify against them. وهم بملكوتهم وبطوبك هراب أطرنا تطلاهم وبهرش هرحابا وحشمنا أطرنا تطالفنهم لوه عبادوك ولوه ثابو من معللهم هرعيم. And they in their kingdom and in thy goodness great, which thou hast given to them, and in the broad and fat land which thou gavest before them, they served thee not, and they turned not from their evil doings. Hinne nahnu hayom abadim. Behold, we today are servants, bondservants, slaves. Waharsh atrana tatalabotenu lehkol et piryah we et tuvah. Hinne nahnu abadim alaha. And the land which thou gavest to our fathers to eat its fruit and its goodness, behold, we are slaves or servants upon it. Utavuhatah marabah lamalakim atranatata alenu bahatotenu. And its produce, it is yielding much for the kings which thou gavest over us by our sins. وعلى قويوتenu مورشليم وببهمتenu كرشونام وبثرغدولا نحن. And upon our backs or our bodies, one's ruling, and our animals like their pleasure, and in great distress we are. ובכל זאת אנחנו כורתים amana וכותבים. And in all this we are ones cutting a faithful, sure thing, and one's writing. وعلى هاتوم شرenu لويenu kohanenu. And upon the thing sealed, our princes, our Lewiyim, our priests.